The morning sunlight filtered through the pine trees that lined our narrow cul-de-sac, casting long shadows across the freshly swept porch. I stood barefoot on the wooden steps, coffee steaming in my mug, waiting. The birds were singing, the air smelled of dew and cut grass, and my pulse pounded like a drum. After 9 long months aboard the USS Truman, my wife was finally coming home. Then I heard it, the low hum of tires on gravel, familiar, disciplined. A matte black Navy transport SUV rolled into view and stopped just outside our fence line. The passenger door opened before the engine even cut off. Alina stepped out. She looked leaner, sharper. Her khaki uniform was crisp and precise, ribbons aligned perfectly along her chest. Her posture straight as a mast broadcast a silent authority honed over years at sea. But her eyes, they softened the moment they met mine. I barely got the chance to move before Max, our Labrador, shot off the porch like a missile and tackled her in a flurry of excited barks. She dropped to one knee, laughing, and ruffled his ears like no time had passed. I reached her a second later, wrapping my arms around her while Max licked at her boots. "Welcome home, Commander," I whispered into her hair. "Permission to kiss my husband," she grinned. "Granted." The moment lasted all of 10 seconds, before it shattered like glass. Excuse me. The voice came from behind the hedge's shrill grating tone that instantly killed the warmth in the air. I looked up. There she was, storming down the sidewalk like a mall cop in heat. Deborah Whitmore, better known across the neighborhood as HOA Karen. Platinum Bob, clipboard in hand, sunglasses that didn't quite hide the judgment in her eyes. "You can't just bring military vehicles into this neighborhood without prior approval," she snapped, pointing toward the SUV like it was a tank. "And I don't recognize this woman. Who is she? Is she even a resident here?" Alina straightened slowly, her back going ramrod stiff, a flicker of confusion giving way to controlled calm. "I live here," she said firmly. "This is my home," Karen snorted. "We'll see about that. As HOA president, I require all new residents to go through a screening process. This kind of sudden appearance is highly irregular." "She's not a new resident," I said, stepping forward. "She's my wife. We bought this house together 5 years ago before she deployed." Karen's nostrils flared. "Regardless, the HOA bylaws clearly state Article 14 section, but by that all long-term absences must be reported and any returning occupants must be You failed to notify the board." "That's not a real law," I said, my jaw tightening. "And you're not a real authority." Karen pulled out her phone. "Fine, if you're going to get hostile, I'll let the police sort it out." She turned and began dialing, muttering something about trespassing, military intimidation, and unauthorized vehicles. Alina glanced at me. Her expression hadn't changed, but I could feel the tension radiating off her in waves. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't posture. She simply reached into her pocket, pulled out her Navy ID and handed it to me. "If the cops show up, let them read that first," she said. "Karen doesn't know who she's messing with." I muttered. Alina's lips twitched. "She will." Karen was still on the sidewalk, now loudly describing the suspicious activity to whoever was on the other end of the line. She paced like she was organizing a sting operation. Max barked once, almost as if in warning. Then Karen locked eyes with Alina and sneered. "You people think you can just flash uniforms and do whatever you want. Not in my neighborhood." Alina tilted her head slightly, her voice smooth as steel. "Ma'am, I've faced down hostile ships in the Strait of Hormuz. You yelling at me on a sidewalk doesn't even register." Karen froze just for a second, but it was enough. She turned and stormed back toward her house, barking into her phone with renewed fury. I turned to Alina. "Welcome home, babe." She took a slow breath, eyes still on Karen. "Some homecoming." I chuckled. "At least it's not boring." Alina didn't laugh. She just stared after Karen and said quietly, "She made a mistake today." And in that moment, I knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The first patrol car arrived in less than 10 minutes fast, even for our small town. Its blue lights cut through the morning sun like a warning flare. A second unit rolled in right behind it, tires crunching over gravel. Karen stood in her yard, arms folded, face twisted in smug satisfaction. Like she'd summoned an army to evict a squatter. I stepped off the porch to meet the officers, keeping Max behind me and my hands visible. Alina stayed calm but alert, her posture unflinching, her Navy ID already in hand. She'd faced adversaries armed with torpedoes. This was just a nuisance. The first officer, Deputy Hawkins, was a seasoned type, gray at the temples, thick hands, and a wary look in his eyes. The second, younger and more eager, scanned the scene with a mix of curiosity and confusion. Karen wasted no time. "There she is," she snapped, pointing at Alina like she was identifying a suspect in a lineup. She showed up out of nowhere, drove that military vehicle onto our street without HOA authorization, and refused to identify herself. "I don't know who she is, but she's trespassing and possibly impersonating military personnel." Deputy Hawkins didn't even look at her. His eyes were locked on Alina. "Ma'am," he said with cautious respect, "may I see some identification?" Alina nodded, stepping forward without hesitation. "Of course, officer." She handed him her credentials. Department of Defense, issued, laminated, and unmistakable. He studied them carefully. His brow lifted. "Commander Alina Reyes," he read aloud, then paused. "USS Truman." "Yes, sir," she said. Karen laughed, sharp and brittle. "Oh, please. Anyone can laminate a fake badge and play soldier. I saw a documentary about its stolen valor. Probably some activist trying to make a point." Deputy Hawkins stiffened. His partner leaned in for a look, and his eyes widened like he'd just spotted a celebrity. "Sir," the young deputy whispered, "that's legit. Her clearance level is higher than ours combined." Karen's face twitched. "What are you talking about?" Hawkins turned, his tone flat. "She's a decorated officer in the United States Navy, ma'am, with 31 confirmed deployments. I suggest you tone down the accusations, but she just showed up unannounced. You can't let people wander into this neighborhood. With she lives here," I cut in, stepping beside Alina. "We've owned this property for 5 years. She was deployed, not disappeared." Karen's eyes darted between us, her certainty unraveling, but the petty warlord in her wasn't ready to surrender. "I don't care who she thinks she is. The HOA has protocols screening approval residency filings." Hawkins cut her off. "Ma'am, HOS don't override federal identification or property ownership, and your bylaws aren't enforceable by law enforcement unless there's an actual violation of municipal or state code," Karen sputtered. "So you're taking their side?" "No, ma'am," he said flatly. "I'm following the law." Alina stepped forward, her voice low and measured. "I appreciate your professionalism, Deputy, but I'd like this documented. She falsely accused a federal officer of impersonation, called law enforcement under false pretenses, and attempted to block lawful access to my property." Hawkins nodded. "We're filing a report. And for the record, you're well within your rights, Commander." Karen's mouth opened, then shut. She spun around and stormed toward her front door, muttering, "This isn't over. I will talk to the board about this." The younger deputy gave Alina a respectful nod. "Thank you for your service, ma'am." She gave a small, tired smile. "I just wanted to come home." They pulled out soon after, leaving behind silence and the low rumble of Karen slamming her front door. I turned to Alina. "You okay?" She exhaled slowly. I expected a hug, maybe a nap. Instead, I get suburban warfare. "I told you this HOA was bad. You thought I was exaggerating," she smirked. "No, you undersold it." We stood in the driveway, the sun warming our shoulders, the SUV still packed with gear. Max sat beside us like a sentinel. I thought it would end there. A nasty welcome, a tense misunderstanding, and then things would quiet down. But Alina wasn't just a returning wife. She was a high-ranking officer trained in strategy, equipped for resistance. And Karen wasn't just a nosy neighbor. She was a petty tyrant clinging to control in a kingdom of mulch and mailbox paint codes. This wasn't a misunderstanding, it was a declaration of war. And war was something my wife knew very well. By the following morning, Karen had escalated from petty to punitive. We woke up to a neon-orange notice of violation duct-taped to our front door. The alleged offenses: unauthorized vehicle, unauthorized occupant, flag placement, inconsistency, and, no joke, uniform display on porch railing. "Uniform display," I muttered, peeling it off. "Is she actually fining you for hanging up your jacket?" Alina took the paper, eyes scanning it like a tactical report. "Looks like she's testing boundaries." "She's testing the wrong woman," I said. Alina didn't smile. She'd slipped into a different gear now, militarygrade.com, the kind of focused composure she wore in combat briefings. She wasn't angry, she was calculating. The next day brought more harassment, a citation for improper loan edging, a demand that we remove Max's water bowl from the porch because it was visible from the street. Karen had even started snapping photos from her window, thinking she could document us into submission. What Karen didn't understand, what she never could understand, was who she had picked a fight with. Alina wasn't just a Navy officer, she was a strategist, a tactician who had coordinated evacuation protocols during missile threats, a woman who had directed air support in a blackout while managing 50 sailors under pressure. Karen's HOA handbook was no match. By Thursday, Alina was at the county courthouse filing a request under the Freedom of Information Act. She wanted the HOA's financials, election records, charter, and the bylaws Karen kept citing like scripture. What she found wasn't just problematic, it was nuclear. The HOA had never formally registered with the county's housing division. Technically, it didn't exist. Karen had been running the HOA like a private kingdom, collecting dues, issuing fines, and threatening legal action, all without a single valid document to back her power. Worse, the elections she bragged about, all uncontested. Also, she had effectively voted herself president for 6 years straight, armed with evidence. Alina called a lawyer, a Navy JAG officer she'd served with on the Truman. Within 48 hours, he'd drafted a memorandum backed by citations from both civil and housing code. Not only was Karen's authority legally flimsy, but she'd also opened herself and the HOA board to liability for false enforcement, misuse of collected funds, and harassment. But Alina wasn't finished. She composed an email to every homeowner in Timberwood Lake's 117 properties. The subject line was simple: the truth about your age. The email included a PDF of the legal memo, photos of Karen's citations, scanned copies of unregistered filings, and a timeline of misconduct. Alina signed it with her full name and rank: Commander Alina Reyes, U.S. Navy. By nightfall, the neighborhood was buzzing. People who had once avoided Karen's wrath began speaking out. One elderly couple admitted they'd paid over $2,000 in compliance fines over 3 years and had no clue they could challenge them. Another neighbor posted in the community group chat, "If Commander Reyes is leading the charge, I'm following her into battle." Within 24 hours, a petition had been drafted and circulated. By the next afternoon, 92 homeowners had signed to dissolve the HOA and demand a full audit of its funds. Karen, for once, was silent. But her silence didn't mean surrender, at least, not yet. That Saturday, an emergency HOA board meeting was called, this time on the lawn of the clubhouse. Karen showed up in full pastel armor, wide-brimmed hat, powerwalk sneakers, and a folder so thick it looked like she'd printed the internet. She started with a shrill voice, ranting about insubordination, outside agitators, and my favorite, seditious behavior within a planned residential community. Then Alina stepped forward. She wasn't in uniform. She wore jeans and a navy blue t-shirt. No ribbons, no rank on display. But when she began to speak, the entire crowd went still. "I didn't return from deployment expecting a battle," she began, "but if one's forced on me, I won't lose." She calmly outlined every violation Karen had committed. She cited codes, quoted statutes, explained in plain terms how Karen's leadership had been based on illusion and intimidation. And then, she finished with this: "You can fear Karen, or you can free yourselves. You don't need rank to stand up to a bully. You just need to know the truth." The silence that followed was louder than any shout. Even Karen's own allies looked shaken. She didn't respond. She just gathered her papers and walked off the lawn. No threats, no promises, just a tight-lipped retreat. But Alina turned to me, her eyes sharp. "She's not done yet," she whispered, and I knew Karen still had one desperate move left. Karen's final move came at dawn. Not with lawyers, not with letters, with drama, the only language she truly spoke. That Monday morning, just as the sky turned pink, a flatbed truck rolled into our driveway, unannounced, uninvited. On its side, Timberwood Towing Co. behind it. Karen stood in her bathrobe and sandals, sipping coffee like it was a front-row seat to a fireworks show. Alina was already outside, lacing her boots. The tow truck driver stepped out, half apologetic. "Got a call to remove an unauthorized vehicle." I raised an eyebrow. "You mean my wife's Navy SUV? The one registered to this address?" He shrugged. "Just following orders. HOA said it's a violation." Alina stepped forward, badge already in hand. "That vehicle is and exempt from HOA regulation under federal law. You so much as touch it, and you're interfering with military property." The driver backed off fast. "Look, I don't want trouble." "Then leave," Alina said, her voice edged with steel. He left. Karen, however, didn't. "This isn't over," she barked. "Your threats, your uniform, none of it scares me. I built this neighborhood." Alina walked down the driveway. Calm as glass. "You built nothing," she said. "You exploited your neighbors. You made people afraid to plant flowers without permission. You turned this place into your personal kingdom, and now it's crumbling. You did that, not me." Karen's jaw clenched. Her hand trembled on her coffee mug. "You don't belong here." Alina smiled, not cruelly, but with the satisfaction of someone who'd seen this ending from miles away. "I belong here more than you ever did." And then came the final blow. Later that afternoon, the County Housing Board sent out an official notice to every home in Timberwood Lakes. The HOA's status had been revoked. The entire board was suspended pending investigation, and Karen, she was being audited for unauthorized fines, misuse of funds, and tax evasion. The letter was clear: you are no longer permitted to act in any official capacity within the community. The same neighbors who once avoided Karen's wrath now celebrated her downfall like a national holiday. Lawn chairs came out. Bottles were opened. Someone even put up a mission accomplished banner on their garage. Karen vanished for a few days after that. Her for sale sign went up quietly, planted crooked in her yard like a white flag stuck in the mud. But Alina didn't gloat. She didn't taunt or revel. She just returned to our porch, sat with Max at her feet, and watched the wind ripple the American flag we had rehung that morning, now centered perfectly, by regulation, and no longer cited as a violation. Friday, the neighborhood invited us to a community gathering, unofficial, informal, free of rules in Karen's presence. Families brought folding chairs. Someone brought a projector for a backyard movie. Kids ran barefoot across the grass. Dogs barked and fireflies blinked like tiny lanterns over the lawn. As dusk fell, Alina was called up to say a few words. She walked to the front slowly, hands in her pockets, a woman of action who never sought the spotlight. "I didn't come home to fight," she began. "I came home to rest. But rest doesn't come easy when fear rules your neighborhood. I've served overseas. I've seen what happens when power goes unchecked. It doesn't take tanks and tyrants. It starts small, with rules no one questions, with silence, with surrender." She looked out at the crowd, men and women, some holding hands, others just nodding. I didn't fight Karen alone. You stood up, you spoke up, and that's what changed everything. Authority isn't about clipboards or titles, it's about integrity. And you all proved you have more of that than she ever did. The applause was thunderous, and in that moment, Timberwood Lakes felt like home again later that night. As we lay in bed with the windows open and crickets singing in the dark, I turned to Alina. You know, I said, you didn't just come home. You saved the neighborhood. She smiled, eyes half closed. I just reminded them what leadership looks like. And as I drifted off beside the woman who'd fought battles both overseas and on our front lawn, I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just a victory, it was a liberation.